right, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for showing up today, and welcome to today's didactic lecture, Sustaining the Self, How Not to Pour from an Empty Cup, with Meg Long, the Director of Training and Technical Assistance at the Center for Health Innovation. So some background on Meg. Meg has a master's degree in public health from New Mexico State University, where she is also currently an adjunct professor for the Public Health Sciences Department. She's worked in the field of public health since 2002, and her areas of expertise are mental health, international health, sexual health, violence and suicide prevention, substance use disorder prevention, and food insecurity. Meg currently leads CHI's Grow Our Behavioral Health Workforce Consortium, which aims to strengthen and expand the behavioral health workforce in southern rural New Mexico. So Meg, thank you for joining us today, and I now hand it off to you.
Thanks so much, Mario. So, hello everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. So as Mario said, I'm currently the Director of Training and Technical Assistance at the Center for Health Innovation, which is New Mexico's Public Health Institute. And I'm also a part-time faculty at NMSU's Public Health Sciences Department. So that being said, my current position is not actually directly related to this presentation. So, I've been working in the field of public health since 2002. And in my various positions and experiences working in direct service during that time, prior to my current role, kind of led me to discover the content of this presentation. And I discovered it mostly out of necessity. It was necessary to have certain tools, certain techniques, certain skills in order to continue working in a challenging, kind of working with and in challenging and at times painful topics. And to do so without getting burnout, right? Or without getting so compartmentalized that I was kind of unempathetic to the situation of my clients or my patients or my residents, depending on my particular situation. So what we're going to talk about today are really the different tools and techniques and skills that I picked up along the way to help me work in this field within these topics for such a long period of time and be able to actually, serve my patients and my clients well. So in addition to that, and outside of my full-time position, I'm also a yoga instructor. I'm a yoga teacher trainer, and I also provide professional development to the Las Cruces public school system for their staff in terms of resiliency and kind of stress management. So the first thing I'm going to do is just give you a little bit of background in terms of my work to give you a context of how this all fits together. This is going to be kind of a little bit more of like a workshop than a presentation. So I'm really going to ask you guys to jump in, and I'm going to kind of speed through this because it's definitely not one of the most important parts of this presentation. But so I started working with the Red Cross with disaster relief. So I was down in New Orleans and Houma, Louisiana for Tropical Storm Isidore and Hurricane Lily. And so I was there for several months, kind of responding to that disaster. And then a little bit before that and a bit after that, I worked at an inpatient psychiatric unit. And so that was a locked unit with 24 beds for individuals with behavioral health needs. And then also there was a lot of detox happening for alcohol and substance use because the rehabilitation centers had recently been closed. After that, I joined the Peace Corps. And so I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya, East Africa from 2003 to 2005, working with HIV/AIDS, and water sanitation. So really working in prevention of communicable diseases. And at that time, in the village that I lived, about 1 in 4 people had AIDS. So it was a very large issue there that I was trying to help combat. After coming back, I worked at Outer Cape Help Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts. And that's when Massachusetts was enrolling Mass Health, which was kind of like a pilot for what's now universal healthcare. So I was helping underserved and minority populations access that extremely complicated and still being developed system. After that, I moved to New Mexico to get my master's in public health. And so during that time, I worked at the CALL, the Crisis Assistance Listening Line, which some of you might be familiar with. So the CALL actually morphed into the Crisis and Access Line, which is now like the 988 line. So it's kind of like the pilot of that from the DOH way back in the day. So I was a call responder. It was a warm line, but it was also a suicide line. So doing the suicide intervention and assisting different New Mexicans and then some individuals from El Paso with their different needs. After getting my master's in public health, I moved up to Portland, Oregon, and worked at Ronald McDonald House Charities for 4 years. And so for those of you that are not familiar with that charity, we provide housing to families who have to travel 50 miles or farther so that their children can receive medical treatment. So the hospital campus that I was on served a lot of children that were getting transplants that had neurological disorders. There was an extremely effective eating disorder treatment facility there. So most of our families were kind of working through, and a very good oncology unit. So a lot of kiddos with cancer. So most of our families, it was a 24 family facility. Their kids were, working with those types of challenges. So after about 4 years, I desperately missed the desert sun. And so I moved back to New Mexico and I ran the violence prevention program at New Mexico State University. And so again, very much working with domestic violence, sexual assault, and suicide intervention. After that, I shifted positions at NMSU and I ran their social services and their food pantry. So assisting the students who are housing insecure or homeless, as well as students and faculty and staff that were experiencing food insecurity. That's kind of the background of what I've been doing in public health. So a lot of kind of heavy topics, right? Like a lot of drug service. So if you look over to the right part of the screen where there's those circles, this is kind of where the topics that we're going to be talking about during this presentation overlap. So when I was in the Peace Corps on the way to where I lived for 2 years, I had to go through Nairobi to get to my site. And I was kind of walking by a bookstore and I saw a book on yoga. And I thought, I've never done yoga, but it's going to be hard for me to kind of exercise or work out where I'm going to be. So I just grabbed it. And I just started kind of taught myself through that book how to do some yoga poses. I later learned that I taught myself how to do them mostly incorrectly, but still, it was doing what I could. So I started doing yoga and continued to throughout the years. And then when I was working at the Ronald McDonald House Charities, and we had a lot of, families in extreme crisis. Unfortunately, not all the kiddos make it. And so the volunteers and the staff that I worked with noticed my ability to kind of process and to be able to manage the stress that we were under given the situation. And so they started asking me kind of like what I was doing, right? And so I would provide them some suggestions and things that worked for me. And then continuing on as I moved back to New Mexico and worked at the university, that continued to happen. And then it kind of shifted into different staff and different faculty asking me to give presentations to their staff or to their students about how to handle stress, about different things that I do so that I can kind of get through my day and not get shut down, not, snap at my partner when I got home, like all the things that happen when we have this stress. Okay, so that's a little bit of background. And I wanted to kind of illustrate that to say that, the reason for the need is on the left, but what kind of happened in terms of being able to manage it is on the right. And it wasn't done by me just like reading something. It was by the practice over many years, right? So the goal of this presentation are two. One is to increase the awareness of your particular situation. And so kind of going back to the title, the amount that you have in your cup, right? The amount of energy you have, the amount of ability you have to kind of bounce back. And so we're going to do this through different concepts, some discussions and like activities, right? The other goal is for you all to experience different techniques and strategies to increase your adaptive stress competency. So what I mean by adaptive stress competency is your ability to kind of respond to stress and to neutralize, right? And to not allow it to keep kind of pushing you down. And so that's really how you're going to be able to fill your cup when it starts to become drained. And that's going to be through practice. So of these two goals, the practice and the experience is what's going to provide you the most benefit, right? The concepts are really just something for your mind to chew on, right? Because our brain is really active. But the fact is you can read about 100 books on like mindfulness and stress management, and it's not going to be as helpful as actually sitting and doing deep breathing or actually engaging in those types of activities, right? So that's being said, let's go ahead and start from there. So we're going to do our first breathing. So go ahead and bring both of your feet on the ground. And you're going to scooch back in your chair so that your lower back is against your chair if you can. Okay. And then bring your hands in your lap. And you're welcome to close your eyes. If you don't feel comfortable closing your eyes, that's totally fine. You can just look off the tip of your nose and just have like a soft gaze, okay? We're just gonna start by taking a few breaths together. So take a deep inhale through your nose, bring your shoulders up towards your ears. And then as you exhale, roll them back and bring them back down towards your hips. Good. Inhale, shoulders up towards your ears. Exhale, back and down. Okay, one more, just like that. Inhale, shoulders up. And then exhale, just let them drop nice and heavy towards your hips. Good. Okay, so now we're gonna start this calm, abiding breath. I want you to bring your hands and just place it on your lower belly. And you're just gonna notice your breath. You don't need to control your breath in any way. Just simply feel your belly getting bigger as you inhale and feel your belly getting smaller as you exhale. So whatever pace is natural for you, you're simply being aware of your inhale and aware of your exhale. So inhale, let your belly get super big, no one can see you, and then exhale all the air out. Good. So on your next inhale, I want you to bring your hands up a little higher so they're on your ribs. And again, you're not going to control your breath at all. So go ahead, inhale, let your ribs get really big. And then as you exhale, feel your lungs collapse in. And again, at your own speed, you're simply inhaling and exhaling. Now noticing how your ribs move when you breathe. Then on the next inhale, you're going to move your hands up so they're just underneath your collarbone. And as you inhale, you'll feel your chest rise up. And as you exhale, you'll feel it fall. So again, maybe you're breathing faster or slower than I'm saying. It doesn't matter. You're simply becoming aware of your breath and the movement of your body within it. Complete inhales and complete exhales. Good. And then your next inhale, you can go ahead and open your eyes, bring your hands down, and then we're going to come back, bring our attention back to the room with this awareness activity. So what I'd like you to do is look around and acknowledge 5 things that you can see around you. So maybe it's behind you, maybe it's below you, just noticing 5 things. Okay, so now I want you to acknowledge 4 things that you can touch around you, and you can go ahead and touch them. So just 4 things that you're touching with your fingers or your feet. Great. So next I want you to acknowledge 3 things that you can hear. So it could be, within your office, it could be something, through the didactic, but just noticing 3 different sounds. Now I want you to acknowledge 2 things that you can smell. And then lastly, 1 thing that you can taste. Okay, great. So that's a really quick, it's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That can kind of help you reset. So the first assessment activity we're going to do is related to the wellness wheel. So I'm going to throw this in the chat. Okay, and it just explains each of the different dimensions of the wellness wheel. And so, so you just kind of have that for future reference. There we go. Okay. And in case it's like, for me, it's like super hard to see this little writing. So I just wanted you guys to have another option of seeing what they each are. So this activity can be quite large. So I'm really scaling it down for the amount of time that we have. So we're going to pick 1 section from the wellness wheel to start with. And so what I would like you to do is think about physical wellness, right? And so in terms of this wellness wheel, and if you're in public health, we have lots of wheels. So there's lots of, kind of like different definitions for the wellness wheels, but they're all basically have the same concept. So for physical, it really has to do with your physical wellness, right? So if you're moving around, if your body is mobile, if you're eating well, if you're sleeping, if you're managing your stress, if you're receiving like preventative medical care or different types of screenings. So what I would like you to do, and you can write it down on a piece of paper if you have one, or you can pull up like a Word document. I want you to think about physical wellness, like your definition of your optimal physical wellness in regard to you, because it's going to be different, right? Someone who has like a bad knee, their optimal wellness is not like running 5 miles a day, right? It's going to be different depending on who you are. So I want you to just write like a 1-sentence, maybe 2-sentence definition of how you see your definition of optimal wellness for your physical health. Okay, so once you have like, this is how I would be 100% the best physical health. I want you to very honestly, and you're not going to have to share this, but I want you to rank it, right? So how would you rank where you are now compared to what that optimal idea of wellness is for you? Okay. So once you have that, I want you to write down, and just whatever pops into your head, what are the things that influence your wellness in that section? So what affects where your physical health is, good or bad? It could be people, it could be places, it could be different, and places in terms of like things that are available to you, right? It could be habits. I mean, it's like a wide variety. So just what pops in your head, like what's affecting your physical wellness? Not so much here, but other places I lived, like the seasons, definitely. When it's snowing, that's got a huge impact, right? Okay. So at a later time, I encourage you to kind of go back to this and maybe use that link and look at the different sections of the wellness wheel. So this wellness wheel is like a holistic wheel, right? And these are all the different dimensions that are a part of everyone, right? Because, say that physically we're great, but we just got in a fight with our partner. Like, how do we feel, right? How does that affect our day? So it's not like, each one is isolated. They're all interconnected and they all affect each other, right? And so it's a really, very beneficial exercise to kind of identify like, what is optimal wellness in each of these sections to me personally? What does that look like? Where am I at, right? And then list what is kind of affecting the wellness that I have in each of those sections. Like I said, for time, we're just going to do this one as an example. So now what I'd like you to do is look at that list of things that are affecting your physical wellness. And if it's something that's draining you or something that's kind of negatively impacting your physical wellness, I want you to put an X next to it. And if it's something that's filling you up or something that's increasing or improving or maintaining your physical wellness, I want you to put a star next to it. So really quickly, just kind of go through your list. And is it something that's supporting or improving your wellness? A star, or if it's something that's diminishing or having a negative impact on your wellness, you can put an X. And so this is really helpful to do as an assessment of the different parts of your life and how they're impacting you positive or negatively, particularly when they're things that are just like a common part of your day, right? And this can be especially insightful in the social, right? So if you're spending a lot of time with people, certain people, and you have a big X next to them because they're draining you, maybe that's time to reassess how much time do I want to actually spend with this person, right? And do I have the ability to kind of, manage that or mitigate that in some way? Okay. So when we have things that are draining us, it's important to think about how frequently we're kind of refilling up, right? So when we have a lot of X's, how often are we doing the things that we gave stars to? And so there's kind of two different ways to do that, right? You can on a daily basis do things that kind of help you refill so that you're constantly kind of neutralizing what's draining you. Or you can kind of get drained and then completely refill. And that's sometimes what we do when we have like a long vacation, right? We've been working really hard, we're kind of drained, we're exhausted, and then we go on vacation. I usually suggest the former because what can happen, and some of you might have experienced this, is that you get drained, you take a big break, you go on vacation, and it takes you like 2 or 3 days to relax, right? When you're on vacation, because you're so wound up from work. And so having little techniques throughout your day or throughout the week, right, to help you kind of refill will help to reduce the amount of time it really takes you to reset once you are drained. Okay, so let's look at work specifically. I would like you to write down 3 adjectives that describe your work. And while you're doing that, I'm going to look in the chat because I know you guys told me what you're doing. Oh, a certified community health worker, fantastic. Doniana, very good. Great. Okay, so once you have your 3 adjectives, I'd like you to write down what is your biggest cause of stress in work right now. So is it a policy? Is it a person? Is it a coworker or is it a supervisor? Is it a particular client? Is it a certain system that you have to work within, right? Is it an exam you have to take? So just thinking about what kind of the biggest cause of your stress is at this particular moment. And so now I want you to think about that stress and whether or not it's something that's within your control, right? So is it something that you have the power to kind of shift how much you have to be affected by that particular thing? Because often the amount of control we have over something can often be very related to our perception. And so I'm going to tell you a little story to kind of illustrate that, and you all might be familiar with it, right? So there's a little elephant, right? And elephants tend to like wreak havoc, right? So there's a little elephant that's kind of wreaking havoc in the area that he is. And so the people grab him and they put a like rope around his foot and they put it on a stake and they put it in the ground. So he can kind of only go in a certain area, and they're feeding him and watering him. They're very nice to him, but they just can't have him running around doing all the things that little elephants do. So he doesn't like the stake, he like pulls on the rope, but it's a stake, it's in deep and he can't do anything about it, right? So he just kind of stays there and gets used to his area. So in time, the elephant grows, right? And becomes extremely big and very heavy and very strong. Yet he still has this little rope and this little stake, and he's staying in his area. Because when he was small, he learned that he can't get away from that rope and that stake. And so he just stopped trying. So even though he's strong enough to rip it out very easily, he just stays there, right? And so that can happen to us at work very easily, right? We can, especially when we first start a job, maybe be very motivated, have all these different ideas, have these different things. And then in time, we start to get kind of worn down, right? From hearing no or certain policies. And so we kind of stop asking. And so in some ways, whatever didn't work before, maybe will never work. But sometimes policies change, right? Sometimes, leadership changes. And so with that, whatever the stress was that you feel like you can't control, it may actually now be within your control. But if we just get so used to being stuck by that stake, you know, in that rope, that we kind of stop trying to pull against it, right? So what I would like you to do is to write in the chat, if you're comfortable, kind of one thing in your work environment that you would like to shift, but you don't think that you can. So one thing that could change that would help reduce the stress that you have. Even if it sounds huge and just like unrealistic, right? So I know with my current work, it's like, well, if we had, you know, 500 more behavioral health specialists, that would be great, you know? So, but even if that's, you know, not possible, you can still just like throw it in the chat just to get an idea. So as you're thinking about that, I'm going to have us shift into our next mindfulness exercise. So there's going to be two, and one kind of piggybacks off the other. You can do them individually or together. So the first is called stop. So let's do that. We're just going to stop what we're doing. You know, if you're typing in the chat, you can stop. You're going to take a breath. Take a deep inhale. Exhale, let it go. And then just observe. So just kind of like take a look around, see what's happening beyond like the narrow that you have. And then we're going to proceed, right? And then you'll just continue your day. So anytime during the day, this is really helpful, especially when you're starting to feel like overwhelmed or things start to be moving very quickly. You can just stop, take a breath, look around, and then continue. You can add on to that in the observe part if you have time, because this literally takes, you know, like 5 seconds. But in the observe part, you can add this on top of it, which is called sift. And so as you're observing, you're going to notice your sensations, right? So are you warm? Are you chilly? You know, is your stomach upset? Like, are your hands cold or your hands sweaty? You know, just like, what are the sensations of your body? And then you're going to shift into images, right? So like, what are you looking at, right? Or if something's happening that you're kind of like playing a story in your head, right? Where you're kind of projecting the future and you're like imagining something, noticing like, what are the images in my head? Like, what is the conversation that I'm creating that has not happened yet, right? Or hasn't occurred yet. And then once you just have to become aware of it. We're not analyzing it. We're not like explaining. We're just like, oh, that's what I'm imagining at this particular point. And then move into the feelings. So how are you feeling? You know, are you happy? Are you anxious? Are you excited? Are you overwhelmed? And then move into, what are my thoughts right now? You know, what am I thinking about this situation? And this is a very purposeful process, from sensations to images to feelings to thoughts, because we often get very stuck in our head, right? Like, how many of us have driven home from work, you know, if you're back in an office, and like you get home and you don't even remember driving home, right? You're just like in your head, either reliving your day or thinking about tomorrow or whatever. And so this really forces us to get into our body, right? Because our body is always in the present, right? And so if we click back into our body, it's going to force us to kind of be where we are, right? To notice like what we're seeing, to acknowledging what our feelings are, which we might not even really realize. And then we can go back to our analytical mind. Okay. So those are two really fast, really easy things that we can do for a quick reset. So all of these activities, and almost all mindfulness activities, they're really simple. Like, there's nothing difficult about them, and they usually don't take much time. It's just a matter of actually doing them, right? So, So staying on that concept of perception, you know, a lot of the perception of kind of our situation and our relationship to it can have a big impact in terms of our day-to-day and our day-to-day stress and how we respond to it, right? And so that's kind of looking at, is life something that's happening to me, or am I living my life, right? So if you're in a meeting, you know, when people are talking about, okay, these are the things that we need to do, are you just kind of feeling like it's getting dumped on you? Or do you feel like, okay, this is a program that I work at and I manage, how will these work for me, right? So what is that perception? Like, do you have the ability to decide how to organize it within your day-to-day? Likewise, it's the concept of, am I in my emotion, right? So am I angry, or am I angry at this particular moment, right? So are you kind of taking on that emotion as your identity, or are you seeing it as, oh, in this particular situation, this is how I'm feeling, right? And it seems very basic and very simple, yet in the moment, it can really do a lot to shift how you're seeing yourself, and also how you can control your situation so that it fills you up, as opposed to kind of feeling sometimes even, you know, like a victim that is, and these things are draining you, right? So this perception and this kind of like day-to-day interactions with our clients and our patients can have a big impact on us, right? So I want to move into this concept of trauma exposure and secondary trauma, right? And this quote I want to read to you because I think it's so telling, right? So when external trauma becomes internal reality, right? So this perception, right? So is this happening to me, or is this what, or do I have control over things? When this happens as a result of our work, it can catch us off guard. We often assume that our very status as helpers grants us immunity from the suffering we witness, and we are often wrong, right? And so this is why kind of like self-reflection and the wellness wheel assessment is so important, because we feel that like our title can kind of protect us from being impacted by our work, when in fact, most of us choose the jobs that we do because we are sensitive, right? We are empathetic. We do generally care for like the well-being of people, even when we don't know them, right? And so just because we have a title, you know, that says like I'm a community health worker, that doesn't mean that you don't have this impact, that we're kind of shocked when we have it. So the result of this is secondary trauma, right? And so secondary trauma is defined as indirect exposure to trauma through a firsthand account or narrative of a traumatic event. So it's something working in direct service, you know, we hear all the time, right? It's really that consists of the majority of our day, depending on what we're doing, right? And so the aim of this workshop is kind of to move into the direction of what's called trauma stewardship. And that's the last bullet point here. So trauma stewardship is a daily practice through which individuals, organizations, and societies tend to the hardship, pain, or trauma experienced by humans, other living beings, or the planet itself. That by developing the deep sense of awareness needed to care for ourselves while caring for others and the world around us, we can greatly enhance our potential to work for change ethically and with integrity for generations to come. So trauma stewardship is basically saying, you know, we're working in the realm of trauma and trauma exposure, and we're able to manage it in a way that still improves what we're going for without it having this kind of long-lasting impact on us, right? Because I'm sure most of us know at least somebody who got really burnt out and maybe became bitter or really wasn't helping in the way that they want to, right? So these are 16 warning signs of secondary trauma. Now I'm going to read these off, and I would like you to write down the ones that you feel like you recognize within yourself, right? So again, we're not going to have to share this, but I'm just going to read through it, and I just want you to jot down the ones that you're just like, oh, that sounds really familiar. Okay. So feeling helpless and hopeless, a sense that you can never do enough, hypervigilant, having diminished creativity, inability to embrace complexity, minimizing, chronic exhaustion or physical ailments, inability to listen or deliberate avoidance, dissociative moments, a sense of persecution, guilt, fear, anger and cynicism, an inability to empathize or numbing, addictions, and that's really any addiction. So like shopping, gambling, drinking, whatever. Grandiosity, right? So this kind of inflated sense of importance related to work. So I remember very clearly when I worked in an inpatient psychiatric unit, there was a woman, and I can't remember what her job was, but she was really high up in a corporation. And she kind of had a little bit of a incident, right? Because of her intense stress, which caused her to be in the psychiatric unit. And I remember really clearly that she was so concerned about the project that she was working on. She was constantly trying to explain to the psychiatrist that had admitted her that she has to be released because this huge project with millions of dollars was just going to fall apart without her, right? And she was in there, I want to say for probably 2 or 3 months. And every day it was like the biggest thing. Like she just could not really understand that it was actually going on during the time that she was there, right? She had experienced so much kind of secondary trauma that she just couldn't make that connection. So all of these warning signs are ways that we're emptying our cup, right? Like there's signs that our cup is getting emptied. They can lead to compassion fatigue. They can lead to overall burnout. So the next activity that we're going to do is really interesting because there's been recent studies with soldiers that indicate that this meditation, and it's actually a meditation, not a mindfulness activity, has been used with soldiers that are experiencing PTSD. And so there's been some studies that are indicating that they can kind of increase the stress competency and reduce the effects of that PTSD for the soldiers. So if you're somebody who likes reading peer-reviewed articles, there's links to both of those if you want to read a little bit about that. But this is called loving kindness meditation. Okay, so we're going to do it together. And so basically you just say these 4 things. So I'm going to say the sentence and then I'm going to have you repeat it. Okay, we're going to do it 3 times. You guys ready? Okay. So, may I be safe? May I be happy? May I be healthy? May I live with ease? And you're welcome to close your eyes if you want to. So we're going to do it again. May I be safe? May I be happy? May I be healthy? May I live with ease? May I be safe? May I be happy? May I be healthy? May I live with ease? Okay, you can go ahead and open your eyes if your eyes are closed. So this is just a really basic meditation, and you can just repeat those 4 sentences. I like to do it 3 times, maybe in the morning, maybe at night, or during the day, at some time. And that practice of doing that during the kind of like on a daily basis. So these types of things are much more effective if you do them for short periods of time on a daily or every other day basis than if you take like an hour once a month and like do them all at once. Okay, so it's just like little things sprinkled throughout. Okay, so going back to the secondary trauma. So when we're experiencing these symptoms of secondary trauma, so perhaps, the ones that you wrote down that you're experiencing, and we're draining ourselves and we're kind of emptying our cup and we're not refilling it in any way. And perhaps we're not even realizing kind of what is happening. We can enter what I like to call the cycle of decline. Okay. And it usually starts with, our work stays on our mind when we're outside of work, right? So we finish work and we're still thinking about it. And then your mood and your health are affected, right? Because you're still thinking about it. So you're still a little stressed, and with time that can present physically. And then from that, we tend to feel less satisfied from the work that we're doing. right? Because we're never resetting. And then the more unsatisfied we feel, then the more we think about work when we're not at work, and then the more that we're effective. And it just becomes this like really, self-perpetuating cycle that can occur, right? And so, when we're in this type of cycle, it can be really hard to kind of realize that we're drained or how to refill our cup, right? And then this adaptive stress competency starts to diminish. So this is why mindfulness exercises and like different techniques can be so invaluable. Because like I said earlier, mindfulness is always in the now, right? And it's always like in the present moment. And that's actually like by definition what mindfulness is like being aware of what's happening in every second. So by definition, mindfulness is like in the present, in the now, right? And so this quote I really like a lot, and I feel like it really helps to kind of identify where we can find like our peace, right? So the quote is, if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. If you're at peace, you're living in the present, right? So if you're at peace, you're living in the present. So, our work requires us to actually kind of discuss the past, right? And it requires us to kind of plan and propose like potential future strategies, right? So to do our job well, we kind of have to jump into the past and we have to look at the future, right? So we have to be in those places with like our clients, with our patients, depending on who it is you work with. And we can take 1 or 2 minutes throughout our day to practice mindfulness so that we bring ourselves into the present, right? So that we have these little points where we can kind of increase our stress competency, right? And then that's how we start to shift into trauma stewardship as opposed to just experiencing the secondary trauma. So again, this is just kind of like a concept for you to chew on, but let's think about it in terms of practice. So this is called the RAIN strategy, right? And so it's an acronym. So when you're starting to feel maybe one of those warning signs that you wrote down about secondary trauma, right? If you're starting to feel like exhausted, if you're starting to feel numb, if you're like not, able to like handle any kind of complicated explanation of things, then you can try this RAIN strategy, right? So R is recognize. So you want to recognize what's going on in the way of being an observer. So it's almost like you're watching the situation as opposed to feeling like you're really entrenched in it. And allow is allowing A is allow. So allowing our experiences to be there as it is. So this is really moving away from rationalizing the experience, explaining the experience, analyzing the experience, blaming someone from the experience, right? It's literally just saying, this is the situation I'm in, and that's it, right? And then investigating with kindness, right? So as you're becoming aware of the experience, you also don't want to start putting yourself down, right? You want to be kind to yourself in terms of recognizing what's happening and recognizing what you're experiencing. So, as that very first quote said, when we started talking about the secondary trauma, sometimes we feel like because it's our job, we shouldn't be so impacted by what we're experiencing when we're, hearing these different stories. And so that's a really, tall order to fill. So being really kind to yourself and being okay with experiencing what you're experiencing in that moment, right? And then N is natural awareness. Again, not identifying with the experience. So this is going back to our perception of reality, right? So you might be experiencing secondary trauma. You might realize you're in the cycle of decline, but that doesn't define who you are. That doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to shift out of that cycle, to utilize certain strategies to then move what's going on, right? So next I have a little take-home activity, which obviously is optional, but I really encourage you all to try this. And it's something I actually assign to all my students. So it's talking about gratitude and success. And I encourage you all for the next 2 weeks, so about 14 days, is to write down, and I like to do things in threes. So I write down 3 things I'm grateful for and 3 things that I accomplished or maybe that I'm proud of, right? And so doing that for the next 14 days. And it can look however you want. So I like to do the gratitude in the morning because it kind of sets up my day. And then the success and accomplishments, it makes me like feel good before I go to sleep, right? And so you can do it that way. You can do it at any time that works with your schedule. You know, you can have a notebook, you can just put it in your phone. But I encourage you to try this. It doesn't take much time, but just to write down 1 to 3 things every day you're grateful for, and 1 to 3 things every day that you're proud of or you feel like was a success. And then at the ends of the 14 days, I want you to look at your list and see if you can identify any patterns, right? So are there certain things that when you do them, when you accomplish them, you feel really good and you're constantly writing them down, right? Are there certain people or certain places that you're really grateful for and you're consistently seeing that on your list? And so this can be really helpful because it's really an activity of identifying what it is that's filling you up, right? So if the accomplishments are kind of work related, you know, what types of things that do you do at work that make you feel really good about your job, right? Those will be the accomplishments. What you're grateful for. Is it people? Is it, you know, a pet? Is it, you know, a certain hike? You know, whatever it might be. What are those things that you're constantly grateful for? And so this can be a way to identify how you can increase what's filling you up, right? Because you can say, oh, these are the things that I'm so grateful for. These are the things that I'm always really proud of. How can I make sure that those continue to be part of my day-to-day, right? So at the very least, don't let them decrease. Or how can you actually make them a greater part of your day, you know? And so that's a really easy way to kind of identify what is filling me up in application, because it can be really hard to just sit here and say, okay, let me list the things that make me feel good, right? But if you day to day just say, oh, why did I feel good today? And then go back and look at it, it can give you a very clear picture. And sometimes it can be quite, quite surprising what pops up. So all the activities that we did today, they can be used preventatively, right? So there are different things that you can use throughout the day to kind of set you up, right? Or they can be used reactively, right? So if you're starting to have, a challenging time and you're starting to feel a little bit unsettled, you can just do one of the activities and then that can help you. So it can be really used in a preventative or a responsive fashion. So we're going to end, and we'll have a couple minutes for questions. We're going to end with a tactile breathing exercise. So again, this isn't actually mindfulness because I'm going to have you count, but it can be a really effective activity to kind of reset your nervous system. So before you close your eyes, I'm just going to show you because there's like a hand thing with it. So as you inhale, it's going to be 4 counts. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so you'll inhale, start with your index, middle, ring, pinky, exhale, pinky, ring, middle, index. Okay, so just so you have a visual. So go ahead and scoot back in your chair, make sure your feet are flat. So you want and I tell you to scoot back because you want your hips under your shoulders so your spine is straight. And then if you, bend your elbows and put your palms in your lap. And if you bring your elbows underneath your shoulders, that'll help you from kind of hunching forward, right? So spine is straight, chin is neutral. You're welcome to go ahead and close your eyes. And you're going to inhale, bringing your thumb to your index finger, to your middle finger, to your ring finger, and your pinky. That's a full inhale. Then exhale, pinky, ring, middle, index. That's a full exhale. Inhale, index, middle, ring, pinky. Exhale, pinky, ring, middle, index. So you're going to continue just like that as you inhale, moving through the digits on your fingers until you're completely full, and then exhale, going back down, right? So if your lung capacity is different than the speed that I'm going, then you're just going to change the speed so that it matches your breath, okay? But you can want to continue to inhale as you move through your fingers, exhale, back down. Going at your own pace, finding a steady rhythm. And so some people kind of like to count as they're doing it. So index 1, middle 2, ring 3, pinky 4, pinky 4, ring 3, middle 2, index 1. So feel free to do it whatever way works for you so that you're matching the speed of your finger movement with the amount of time it takes to fill your lungs, and then the same finger movement going back down with the time it takes to empty your lungs. If you find that as you're doing this, your mind starts to wander, I encourage you to press your fingers together a little bit tighter, right? So really press hard and feel that tactile sensation. That's going to bring your mind back to your sensations. It's going to bring you back into the now. Continuing to inhale and exhale. And wherever you're at, you're going to do one more full cycle of breath. So one more complete inhale for 4 counts and complete exhale for 4 counts. And when you finish that exhale, you'll take a big breath in and then exhale, let it go. Good. And then you can go ahead and open your eyes and coming back to the group. So we just have a few minutes left. If you all have any questions or anything that you'd like to share, I'd be very curious if there's different types of mindfulness techniques that you all use that you find effective, or any experience you might have had. But you don't have to share if you don't want to.
Well, I can share. When I first started this position, I didn't know about mindfulness, and everywhere I would go, everybody was doing mindfulness, and I was like, what are they doing? I don't understand what they're doing. So after a while, then I started understanding what it was and how, it could just kind of relax you and calm you. So all this mindfulness was just so new to me. I didn't know what was going on, or, why people were doing it so much.
I think it's common. I think it's kind of a term that's kind of thrown out there a lot.
Right.
You have expected to know, but you know the definition. It's also, unfortunately and inaccurately, used interchangeably with meditation. And so meditation and mindfulness are not actually the same thing. And I really encourage people to, before ever suggesting a meditation, to make sure they try it. Because there's some meditation, because I've heard a lot like, oh, if you're stressed, you should meditate. But in actuality, many meditations are more likely to increase your stress than reduce it, because there's a lot that have breath retention, right? And so I really encourage people to, if they really feel like they want to suggest meditations, to practice it themselves for at least 7 days, because then you know what you're actually suggesting. I know people who were suggested different meditations, especially, it's called like square breathing, or people have called box breathing. But it's like you inhale for a certain amount of counts, you hold it for that same amount, you exhale the same amount, and then you hold the same amount. But the fact is, when you hold your breath, you kind of are, you're mimicking kind of like the body's response when you die. That's like kind of the point for the meditation, because they want you to have a calm mind, right? And so if you suggest to someone who is having anxiety an activity that purposely like mimics a very scary event, like you're not helping them, right? So it's really important to be aware of what you're suggesting, because these are very, very old practices. I mean, they're new in the West, but they're not new by any stretch of the imagination. So it's really important that we give respect to their effectiveness and potency. That's my little soapbox about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Meg. Thank you so much for joining us today. And just, yeah, I know one thing that I was going to mention was that I think this past Saturday was National Physician Suicide Awareness Day. So this lined up perfectly.
Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you taking the time in your busy day and maybe over your lunch hour to join me. And thanks, Mario.
Thank you.